Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of rural Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia hold many secrets within their ancient valleys and mist-covered peaks. Travelers passing through often remark on the beauty, but few know about the darkness that once settled over a particular stretch of land near the town of Blacksburg. It was there, in 1902, that the once respected Calloway family name became synonymous with dread throughout Montgomery County. What began as a simple inheritance dispute would eventually reveal generations of disturbing family history, psychological manipulation, and a legacy that would forever haunt the region. The Calloway estate, once a symbol of prosperity, became a place locals avoided after sunset, not because they believed in ghosts or supernatural occurrences, but because they understood that sometimes the most terrifying things are born from human nature itself. According to county records, on March 17, 1902, Frederick Calloway, patriarch of the Calloway family and owner of the largest timber operation in southwestern Virginia, was found unresponsive in his study. The official cause was listed as natural causes befitting a man of his advanced age. But this seemingly unremarkable end to a prominent citizen's life would trigger a series of events that would expose secrets buried beneath decades of respectability and wealth. It began with the reading of his will at the Montgomery County Courthouse. Family members who hadn't spoken in years gathered in anticipation of their share. What they didn't expect was the strange condition attached to the substantial inheritance. Whoever claimed the family estate would need to live in the main house for 1 full year. This stipulation seemed unusual, but hardly sinister at the time. The family property, situated approximately 7 miles outside Blacksburg along what is now known as Old Mill Road, consisted of over 200 acres of dense woodland and the imposing main house built in 1847. The structure itself was considered architecturally significant, 3 stories of Virginia limestone, with a distinctive hexagonal tower rising from the eastern wing. The locals had always regarded it with a mixture of admiration and unease, though none could articulate exactly why. According to an article in the Blacksburg Gazette dated March 30, 1902, the reading of Mr. Calloway's will has created quite a stir among the family members. His son Thomas appears most distressed by certain provisions. The article, brief as it was, offered no further explanation of what these provisions entailed. Thomas Calloway, the eldest son and presumed heir, surprised everyone by declining his portion of the inheritance and leaving town the very next day. When interviewed by a local journalist at the train station, he reportedly said only, "Some prices are too high." Thomas was never seen in Blacksburg again. This left the inheritance to the younger son, Edmund Calloway, who had been living in Richmond for nearly a decade. Edmund, a quiet man who worked as an accountant, returned to claim the family estate with his wife Margaret. According to their neighbors in Richmond, the couple had always lived modestly despite the family wealth, and many expressed surprise at their decision to return to the family home. What follows is a reconstruction of events based on personal correspondence, journal entries, county records, and interviews conducted by private investigator Samuel Pierce in 1915, 13 years after the incidents began. Pierce had been hired by the Montgomery Historical Society to document the case after rumors had persisted for years. His notes, discovered during a renovation of the Society's archives in 1965, provide the most comprehensive account of what became known locally as the Calloway Matter. Edmund and Margaret arrived at the Calloway estate on April 12, 1902. The house had been vacant for nearly 3 months since the elder Calloway's death. The property's caretaker, William Hughes, reported that the couple seemed in good spirits upon arrival. Mr. Edmund was quiet as always, but pleasant. Mrs. Margaret remarked on how little the place had changed since their wedding. The first indication that something was amiss came exactly 2 weeks after their arrival. On April 26th, Margaret Calloway visited Dr. James Wilson in town, complaining of difficulty sleeping. According to Dr. Wilson's records, she reported hearing movement in the walls during the night. The doctor prescribed a mild sedative and suggested the sounds were likely just the settling of an old house or possibly mice. Edmund Calloway began keeping a journal shortly after moving into the house. The first entries describe mundane activities, supervising repairs to the roof, reviewing the timber business ledgers, and reconnecting with old acquaintances in town. But by May, the entries had taken on a different tone. An entry dated May 17, 1902, reads, "Margaret believes someone entered the house last night. All doors were locked, windows secured. I searched every room and found nothing disturbed. She insists the arrangement of items on her dressing table had been altered. I cannot persuade her otherwise. The isolation of this place weighs heavily on her mind, I fear." By June, Edmund had begun making trips to the Montgomery County Courthouse to research the property's history. The clerk's log shows he requested access to records dating back to the 1840s, when the house was first constructed. According to the courthouse registrar, Joseph Miller, Edmund spent hours poring over old property deeds, land surveys, and building permits. Miller later told investigator Pierce he seemed particularly interested in the eastern portion of the property. He kept asking if there were any disputes or unusual notations regarding that section of land. Meanwhile, Margaret had begun writing letters to her sister in Boston. These letters, discovered in a collection donated to the Virginia Historical Society in 1943, reveal a woman increasingly troubled by her new residence. "My dear Elizabeth," she wrote on June 10th, "Edmund spends his days either managing the timber business or secluded in Father Calloway's study examining old documents. I find myself alone in this enormous house with only the distant sounds of the servants working in the kitchen wing for company. The rooms feel unnaturally cold, even now in summer. Yesterday I discovered a door in the pantry that leads to a narrow service staircase I hadn't noticed before. It ascends to the 3rd floor where Edmund has forbidden me to go. He claims the floorboards are unstable and dangerous, but I sometimes hear him walking above at night." A subsequent letter dated June 24th describes a peculiar incident. "Last evening, Edmund returned from town in an agitated state. He carried a small wooden box, which he immediately took to the study. When I inquired about its contents, he became uncharacteristically sharp with me. 'Some things are best left undisturbed, Margaret,' he said. Later that night, I heard him in the eastern tower room. The sound of scraping, as if he were moving furniture across the floor, continued for hours. When he came to bed near dawn, his hands were dirty with what looked like old soil or clay. He offered no explanation, and I find I no longer have the courage to ask." By July, the household staff began to notice changes in both Edmund and Margaret. Harriet Davis, who served as a cook, told investigator Pierce they stopped taking meals together. Mrs. Calloway would eat early, sometimes before sunrise. Mr. Calloway often didn't come down until evening. Both looked as though they weren't sleeping. Mrs. Calloway jumped at small noises, and Mr. Calloway developed a habit of stopping in the middle of a sentence, as if listening for something. The groundskeeper, Benjamin Taylor, reported similar concerns. Edmund began asking me strange questions about the Eastern Grove, whether I'd ever seen anything unusual there, or if the previous groundskeeper had mentioned anything about it. When I said no, he seemed almost disappointed. Then he instructed me to avoid that area entirely, saying he would tend to it personally. On July 23rd, Edmund made an unusual request of town attorney Robert Garland. According to Garland's notes, Edmund asked him to hold a sealed envelope that was only to be opened in the event of his death. Garland described Edmund as excessively pale and distracted during their meeting. When asked if everything was well, Edmund reportedly replied, "I'm beginning to understand my father's anxieties." The local pharmacist, Peter Collins, noted in his ledger that Edmund had begun purchasing unusual quantities of laudanum and other sedatives. Mr. Calloway claimed the medicines were for his wife's nerves, Collins told Pierce, but I suspected he was taking them himself. His hands trembled when he signed the register, and I noticed dark circles under his eyes. August brought increasing isolation for the couple. They dismissed half the household staff and canceled their subscription to the Blacksburg Gazette. The grocer's delivery boy reported that when he brought their monthly order, Margaret met him on the porch and wouldn't allow him past the threshold. She appeared, in his words, frightfully thin, and her eyes never stopped moving, as if watching something over my shoulder. A letter from Margaret to her sister, dated August 12th, reveals growing tensions. Edmund has taken to locking himself in the East Tower room for hours. The sounds that emerge are difficult to describe, not quite footsteps, but a slow dragging motion across the floor. Sometimes I hear him speaking, though I cannot make out the words. When he emerges, he seems both exhausted and somehow relieved, as if he's completed some taxing but necessary task. Edmund's journal entries from this period become increasingly difficult to decipher. His handwriting, previously methodical and precise, grew erratic. Some pages contain nothing but repetitive lines such as, "It's always been here," and "The walls know." Other pages show detailed drawings of the house's floor plan, with certain rooms heavily shaded in ink. An entry from August 27th stands out for its relative coherence. "Found father's hidden records today. The original agreement was far more explicit than I imagined. 50 years of prosperity in exchange for willing sacrifice. My grandfather chose his brother. My father selected my mother. The pattern is clear. The entity requires family blood freely given. Thomas sensed this. It's why he fled. The responsibility falls to me now. The 50th anniversary approaches. I must decide." By September, Edmund had stopped managing the timber business entirely, leaving operations to the foreman who had worked for his father. He ordered unusual supplies through the town mercantile, multiple locks, mirrors, and enough kerosene to suggest he was keeping every lamp in the house burning throughout the night. The mercantile owner, Samuel Goodwin, later told investigator Pierce, "Mr. Calloway came in every few days for more kerosene. When I joked about him keeping the house bright as day, he didn't smile. He just said, 'Darkness has a different quality in that house, Mr. Goodwin. It gathers in corners where no corners should exist.'" Margaret's correspondence with her sister became increasingly fragmented. A letter postmarked September 10th contains this disturbing passage. "I've begun to see movement in the mirrors. Not reflections, but something behind the glass, watching. Edmund says it's merely fatigue affecting my vision. But last night I caught him covering the mirror in our bedroom with a black cloth. When questioned, he claimed it was to help me sleep without distraction. But I saw the fear in his eyes, Elizabeth. He knows something he won't share." On September 18th, Margaret visited Dr. Wilson again, this time complaining of persistent headaches and a feeling of pressure in her ears. According to the doctor's notes, she described it as like the air before a terrible storm, when everything goes still and heavy. Doctor Wilson found no physical ailments, but noted she appeared significantly underweight and exhibited signs of nervous exhaustion. He prescribed bed rest and suggested a change of environment. Margaret reportedly replied, "There is nowhere we can go that it won't follow." Edmund's journal entry from September 22nd suggests he had begun to conduct some form of research or ritual in the Eastern Grove. Excavation continues. The stone circle is exactly as described in Father's notes. The markings correspond to the constellation alignment that occurs only once every 50 years. 2 weeks remain before the appointed night. I've prepared the tools as instructed. The offering must be willingly given. The blood must be family. Margaret suspects, but does not know. How could she understand the burden of this inheritance? On September 30th, the local doctor was summoned to the Calloway house after Margaret reportedly suffered a fall down the main staircase. Doctor Wilson's records indicate he found her bedridden, but with no signs of physical injury. His notes state, Patient claims she was guided down the stairs by unseen hands. Shows signs of severe anxiety and malnourishment. Husband equally gaunt and agitated. Recommended immediate relocation to a different residence. Advice was firmly rejected by Mr. Calloway, who stated they were nearly finished with what needed to be done. A letter from Margaret to her sister, apparently written the same day but never posted, was discovered in her desk drawer when the house was later searched. I know what Edmund intends now. I found his father's journal hidden beneath the floorboards in the study. The Calloway prosperity has always come at a price. Every 50 years, the head of the family must provide a sacrifice to whatever waits in the Eastern Grove, someone of Calloway blood, Edmund's grandmother, his mother. And now he has chosen me, Elizabeth. The timing of our marriage was no coincidence. He brought me here knowing what would be required. But I have made my own discovery in the county records. There is another way. October brought the first frost and increasingly bizarre behavior from the Calloways. Edmund was observed by hunters on the property digging holes at the edge of the woods and then filling them again before daybreak. When approached, he reportedly fled back to the house without speaking. Local resident Howard Jenkins told Pierce he encountered Edmund in the Eastern Grove around dawn in early October. He was standing in a perfect circle where nothing grew, not a single blade of grass or scrap of moss within that circle, just bare earth. He had some kind of metal tool in his hand, looked like an old surveyor's compass, but with unusual markings. When he saw me, he looked right through me, as if I weren't there. Then he said, "The boundary thins as the day approaches." I left immediately. Something about his eyes wasn't right. Margaret's final letter to her sister, dated October 15th, reads only, "Elizabeth, I now understand why Thomas left. What resides here isn't just memory or madness. It has been waiting for a Calloway to acknowledge it. Edmund has made his decision. I must make mine. The inheritance was never the money or the land. It was something far older." No further correspondence from Margaret exists. Edmund's journal entries for late October contain only one coherent paragraph amid pages of fractured sentences. Father knew, grandfather knew, the responsibility passes down. We have taken so much from this land. The original agreement was made in 1803. Every 50 years, a choice must be made. I found the original documents hidden in the wall behind Father's portrait. The terms are non-negotiable. His final entry, dated October 31st, reads simply, "Tonight." On November 1st, 1902, caretaker William Hughes, concerned after not seeing any activity at the house for several days, entered using his spare key. His statement to the local sheriff describes finding the house in perfect order, almost unnaturally so. Every room was immaculately clean, every item precisely placed. There was no sign of Edmund or Margaret Calloway. Hughes' statement continues, "The strangest thing was the silence. Big houses usually creak and settle, but this one was dead quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath." In Mr. Edmund's study, I found his journal open on the desk, the ink still fresh on the last entry, the word "tonight" written over and over across the page, and every mirror in the house was covered with black cloth. The sheriff's report notes that nothing appeared to be missing. Their clothes remained in the wardrobes, food in the pantry, and Edmund's wallet and Margaret's jewelry were found on the bedside table. A half-eaten meal sat on the dining room table, as if they had been interrupted in the middle of dinner and left suddenly. Sheriff Matthew Collins organized a search of the surrounding woods, focusing particularly on the Eastern Grove that Edmund had shown such interest in. According to his report, the searchers found a circular clearing approximately 30 feet in diameter, where no vegetation grew. At the center was evidence of recent digging, but whatever had been buried or unearthed was gone. The search party reported an unusual reluctance to remain in the area after sunset, with several men describing an oppressive feeling, like being watched from all directions. No bodies were ever discovered, no evidence of violence found. The case was eventually classified as an unexplained disappearance, and the property reverted to county ownership in 1905 after no family members came forward to claim it. The story might have ended there, forgotten like so many rural mysteries of the era. But in 1915, when investigator Samuel Pierce began researching the case, he made a discovery that reignited interest. The sealed envelope Edmund had left with Attorney Garland had never been opened, as Edmund's body was never found to confirm his death. Pierce convinced Garland to open it in the presence of county officials. Inside was a single page torn from what appeared to be a much older document. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the handwriting formal and dated to the early 1800s. It read, "The Calloway lineage shall prosper by agreement with the entity beneath the eastern grove. Blood paid once per generation maintains the contract. Prosperity continues if the chosen Calloway accepts the burden of knowledge and makes the necessary offering before the first frost following the 50th year. Should the burden be rejected, the entity claims its due through other means." The document was signed Elias Calloway, 1803, and bore a strange symbol beneath the signature, a circle containing intersecting lines that Pierce later identified as resembling ancient boundary markers found in various cultures. This document was dismissed by officials as evidence of mental instability in the Calloway line, rather than anything substantive. The property remained abandoned for decades, the house gradually reclaimed by the elements. Pierce's investigation took him next to the Montgomery County land records, where he discovered that prior to 1803, the Calloway family had been struggling farmers with minimal acreage. In that year, Elias Calloway suddenly acquired over 200 acres, including the tract that would become the family estate. The seller was listed as Richmond Investment Company, but Pierce could find no record of such a company existing at that time. Further research revealed a pattern. Every 50 years, the Calloway fortune experienced a sudden expansion, followed by a family tragedy. In 1803, Elias acquired the land. His wife disappeared the following winter. In 1853, Jeremiah Calloway expanded the timber operation significantly. His younger brother vanished while hunting in the Eastern Grove. In 1903, following Edmund's disappearance, the timber business should have passed to Thomas, but he had renounced his claim. Pierce's notes contain this observation. The pattern suggests something beyond coincidence. If one were to accept the premise of the document, however irrational, it appears the agreement requires regular payment. When Edmund disappeared without designating an heir, the cycle was broken. Perhaps significantly, the Calloway timber operation collapsed entirely within 6 months of his disappearance, despite having been one of the region's most profitable businesses for a century. In 1953, during a road expansion project, workers excavating near the old Calloway property discovered a hidden cellar beneath what had once been the Eastern Grove. According to county records, inside they found a collection of personal items dating back to the early 1800s. Wedding rings, pocket watches, lockets containing hair, mementos from generations of Calloways. Each item was arranged in a precise circular pattern around a central stone that bore markings that archaeologists later identified as a combination of settler symbols and indigenous carvings. Dr. Harold Matthews, the archaeologist who documented the find, noted in his report, "The arrangement suggests ritual significance. Each personal item appears to represent an individual, presumably the disappeared family members. The stone at the center bears markings consistent with boundary or threshold symbols found in various cultures, along with what appear to be astronomical notations marking 50-year cycles. The most disturbing discovery, however, was a journal dated 1852, belonging to Jeremiah Calloway, Edmund's grandfather. The final entry, written in shaky handwriting, reads, "I have instructed my son on the requirements of our prosperity. He does not yet understand that the burden is both privilege and prison. The exchange must seem fair, a life willingly given for generations of wealth. The entity accepts no unwilling sacrifices. My father chose himself. I have chosen otherwise. I will not see another spring." The journal contained detailed instructions for a ritual to be performed in the Eastern Grove every 50 years, coinciding with a particular astronomical alignment. The language was obscure, mixing references to boundary stones, thresholds, and the entity that dwells between. Most disturbing were the precise diagrams showing where personal items from the chosen one should be arranged around the central stone. Researchers from the Virginia Historical Society who examined the journal noted that the Calloway timber fortune began precisely in 1803, the same year referenced in Edmund's journal as when the original agreement was made. Before that, according to tax records, the family had been struggling farmers of modest means. The story of the Calloway family's sudden disappearance became something of a local legend, occasionally resurfacing in newspaper articles about the region's unsolved mysteries. The property eventually became part of Jefferson National Forest, the location of the house now just a clearing marked by a foundation of stones and the occasional piece of weathered timber. In 1965, during cataloging of the Montgomery Historical Society archives, an intern discovered a previously overlooked box of materials collected by investigator Pierce. Among them was a photograph purportedly taken of the Calloway house in October 1902, just days before the disappearance. The black and white image shows the imposing stone structure, its windows dark except for one on the third floor, the floor Margaret had been forbidden to visit. When magnified, the window appears to show multiple faces pressed against the glass, though photographic experts who examined the image in 1967 concluded the effect was likely caused by emulsion irregularities common in early photography. Also included in Pierce's materials was a report from a surveyor hired to examine the Eastern Grove in 1916. The surveyor, James Wilson, documented unusual magnetic disturbances in the circular clearing, noting that compass needles spun erratically within the boundary. His equipment consistently malfunctioned in the area, and his assistant reported persistent headaches while working there. Most intriguing was Wilson's observation that the soil within the circle contained trace elements not found in the surrounding area, including unusual mineral compounds that he could not identify with the technology available at the time. The final piece of the Calloway mystery emerged in 1968, when a construction project near the old Richmond residence once owned by Edmund and Margaret uncovered a sealed metal box in the wall. Inside was a letter addressed simply to whoever seeks the truth about the Calloway legacy. The letter, verified as written in Margaret Calloway's hand, was dated October 31st, 1902, one day before they were reported missing. If this is found, know that Edmund and I have made our choice. The burden of knowledge is too great to pass on, yet impossible to escape once understood. The prosperity of the Calloway line was never earned through honest labor. Each generation has paid a price. Edmund's father chose his wife. His grandfather chose his younger brother. The pattern extends back to 1803, when Elias Calloway made the first arrangement. I discovered the truth in September when Edmund began preparing the Eastern Grove. The entity that dwells there requires Calloway blood every 50 years, a sacrifice freely given in exchange for continued prosperity. Edmund intended to offer me, having convinced himself it was necessary to maintain the family legacy. What he didn't anticipate was that I would find Elias's original journal hidden beneath the floorboards of the Eastern Tower. The entity beneath the grove is ancient, older than the settlement of these mountains. It exists at a boundary between worlds. Elias Calloway discovered it by accident while digging a well in 1803. In his desperation to save his failing farm, he made a bargain. The entity would ensure the land yielded prosperity beyond imagining, but required recognition of its power through sacrifice. Edmund has shown me the hidden chamber beneath the Eastern Grove, the ancient stone, the collection that grows with each generation. He intended to choose me to maintain his family's prosperity for another 50 years. I've convinced him there's another way, neither sacrifice nor submission. By the time this is read, we will have sealed the chamber permanently and departed. Not just this place, but this life we've known. Whether we survive what comes after defiance, I cannot say. But the cycle ends with us. Let the Calloway name be forgotten. Let the land reclaim what stands upon it. The letter continued with a detailed description of the ritual Edmund had been preparing and Margaret's alternative plan. Instead of offering blood, we will return all that was taken. Every item acquired through the prosperity granted by the entity must be placed within the circle. Edmund resisted until I showed him the hidden notation in Elias's journal, a single line suggesting that the agreement could be voided through complete renunciation of all benefits received. Tonight, at the appointed hour, we will enter the circle together, surrendering everything, rather than continuing the cycle of sacrifice. Despite extensive searches in the following years, no trace of Edmund or Margaret Calloway was ever found. No death records, no evidence they established new identities elsewhere. The Calloway estate was demolished in 1972 to make way for forest reclamation projects. During the demolition, workers reported unusual resistance from the structure, tools failing inexplicably, equipment malfunctioning near the eastern wing. Several refused to continue working after experiencing what they described as overwhelming sensations of being watched. Demolition foreman Robert Turner's statement to the local newspaper described a peculiar incident. When we began dismantling the eastern tower, 3 men reported hearing whispers coming from inside the walls. There were no pipes or air ducts that could explain the sound. Later that day, a stone fell from the tower and narrowly missed, crushing one of my workers. What struck me as odd was that the stone seemed to fall straight outward, as if pushed, rather than dropping straight down, as you'd expect. The forest has now fully reclaimed the land where the house once stood. Hikers occasionally report finding odd arrangements of stones in circular patterns, though forestry officials attribute these to natural erosion processes or the activity of local wildlife. The last confirmed descendant of the Calloway line, a great-nephew of Edmund who had changed his surname, died in 1957 without heirs. With his passing, the bloodline that had once dominated the region's industry came to an end. The most rational explanation for the events of 1902, according to historians who've studied the case, is that Edmund and Margaret Calloway suffered from a shared psychological break, a folie à deux, triggered by isolation and perhaps exacerbated by environmental factors such as mold in the old house. Their disappearance could be explained by suicide or an attempt to start new lives under different identities. Psychologist Dr. The Calloway case presents an interesting example of how a family mythology might develop over generations, with each new household head absorbing and elaborating on the narrative. Yet this explanation fails to account for the 50-year cycles of prosperity and tragedy that mark the family history, the precisely arranged artifacts discovered in the hidden chamber, or the fact that the Calloway timber fortune collapsed completely within months of Edmund and Margaret's disappearance, despite being one of the most successful operations in Virginia for exactly 100 years prior. Eleanor Richards, who published a paper on the case in 1988, suggested the 50-year cycle might be explained by inherited psychological tendencies. Certain forms of delusional thinking can follow family lines. In 1990, historian Dr. Martin Crawford discovered an intriguing connection while researching early Virginia land disputes. Court records from 1798 showed that the land later purchased by Elias Calloway had previously been the subject of a boundary dispute between settlers and the indigenous people, who had long considered the Eastern Grove a sacred site. According to testimonies in the case, the area contained a gateway stone that tribal elders would visit during specific astronomical alignments. The court records include a statement from tribal representative identified only as Red Hawk. The stone marks a boundary not just of land, but of worlds. It has been watched over by my people since before memory. Those who disturb it risk inviting across what should remain separate. 5 years after this court case, the tribe was forcibly relocated, and the land eventually sold to the Richmond Investment Company, the same mysterious entity that later sold the property to Elias Calloway. In 1995, archaeologist Dr. Rebecca Winters led an expedition to examine the circular clearing in the eastern grove. Her team used ground-penetrating radar to map what lay beneath the surface without disturbing the soil. The results, published in the Journal of Appalachian Studies, revealed an unusual formation approximately 6 feet below the surface, a perfectly circular chamber roughly 15 feet in diameter, with what appeared to be a central platform or altar. The precision of the construction suggests it wasn't created by natural processes, Winters wrote. Carbon dating of soil samples taken from the perimeter indicates the chamber has existed for at least 500 years, long predating European settlement of the region. Permission for excavation was denied due to potential cultural significance to indigenous peoples. The site was designated a protected area and further research prohibited. In 2002, exactly 100 years after the disappearance of Edmund and Margaret, a series of unusual phenomena were reported in the vicinity of the former Calloway estate. Hikers described sudden temperature drops within the circular clearing. Electronic equipment, cameras, phones, GPS devices malfunctioned inexplicably. Most notably, several independent witnesses reported seeing what appeared to be 2 figures standing at the edge of the circle at sunset, though they vanished when approached. Park Ranger David Phillips, who investigated these reports, found no evidence of trespassing but noted in his report, "While I observed no unusual persons in the area, I experienced an unexplainable sense of being observed while within the clearing." More concerning was the behavior of wildlife. Birds avoid flying over the circle entirely, and I observed several deer abruptly changing course rather than crossing the perimeter. In 2003, geologist Dr. Howard Matthews conducted a comprehensive soil analysis of the clearing, comparing samples from within the circle to the surrounding forest. His findings, published in the Journal of Geological Anomalies, described several irregularities. The soil within the circle contains mineral compounds not found anywhere else in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Most notably, there are trace elements that appear almost crystalline in structure, but do not match any known natural mineral. When viewed under an electron microscope, these particles exhibit unusual properties, appearing to shift position when not directly observed. Matthews' paper was largely dismissed by the scientific community as methodologically flawed. He continued his research independently, installing remote monitoring equipment at the site in 2005. After 6 months, he published his findings in a self-funded monograph titled Temporal Anomalies in the Eastern Grove. The document detailed subtle but consistent fluctuations in electromagnetic fields within the circle, peaking every 50 days. More controversially, Matthews claimed to have recorded audio anomalies, whispered voices at the edge of audibility that, when enhanced, appeared to repeat the phrase, "The agreement stands." The scientific establishment rejected these findings, and Matthews' academic career suffered. He continued to visit the site regularly until his sudden death in 2010 from an apparent heart attack while conducting research within the circle. Local author Patricia Reynolds, who has written extensively about Blue Ridge Mountain folklore, suggests the Calloway case represents something beyond conventional explanation, not necessarily supernatural, but perhaps not fully explicable through known psychological principles either. The human mind naturally seeks patterns and explanations, Reynolds wrote in her 2018 book, Shadows in the Blue Ridge. The 50-year cycle of the Calloway tragedies may be coincidence, the entity a manifestation of inherited guilt, the disappearances explainable through rational means. But taken together, the consistency of the pattern and the physical evidence discovered over decades suggests something operating at the edges of our understanding, a family curse that became real through belief, or perhaps something older that found expression through the Calloway bloodline. In 2019, during an unusually cold October, a local photographer capturing autumn foliage near the former Calloway property reported seeing a strange fog that seemed to rise specifically from the area where the eastern grove once stood. The resulting photographs show what appears to be a perfect circle of mist, approximately 50 feet in diameter, distinct from the surrounding forest. Meteorologists explained it as a natural phenomenon caused by temperature differentials in the soil. Those familiar with the Calloway story noted that 2019 marked the 216th anniversary of whatever agreement Elias Calloway supposedly made in 1803, the end of the fourth 50-year cycle since Edmund and Margaret disappeared. A team from the University of Virginia's Department of Environmental Sciences conducted soil samples in the area in early 2020, finding nothing unusual except slightly elevated levels of certain minerals consistent with the region's geological history. Their report made no mention of the Calloway connection, focusing instead on the natural composition of Blue Ridge Mountain soil. Yet local residents continue to report unusual experiences in the area: watches stopping, compass needles spinning, momentary disorientation. A hiking group in 2021 claimed they heard what sounded like whispers coming from the densest part of the former grove, though audio recordings captured nothing unusual. The rational mind dismisses these accounts as the power of suggestion, the human tendency to find patterns where none exist. The Calloway story, with its 50-year cycles and mysterious disappearances, provides a perfect framework for interpreting ordinary phenomena as something more sinister. But as investigator Pierce noted in his final interview, I began my investigation believing I would find a simple explanation, perhaps murder, perhaps suicide, perhaps a carefully planned disappearance. Instead, I found a pattern extending back a century before Edmund and Margaret vanished. I cannot explain it through conventional means. I can only report what the evidence suggests. That evidence, the hidden chamber, the arranged artifacts, the precisely timed cycles of family tragedy, continues to resist simple explanation. The most complete account remains Pierce's unpublished manuscript, The Calloway Inheritance, a study in family darkness, housed in the special collections of the Virginia State Library. The manuscript's final paragraph reads, "Whatever truth lies at the heart of the Calloway mystery, one thing is certain. Something happened in those woods in 1803 that changed the course of a family for generations. Whether bargain, curse, or coincidence, it created a legacy that ultimately consumed them all. The forest has reclaimed the land, the house is gone, the family line extinguished. Only the story remains, and perhaps in the eastern grove, where no vegetation grows in a perfect circle, something still waits, keeping its side of a bargain whose terms we can only imagine." In 2015, a team of documentary filmmakers attempted to create a feature about the Calloway mystery. Their equipment repeatedly malfunctioned within the circular clearing. Sound recordings captured unexplainable static, and batteries drained at an accelerated rate. Most disturbing, according to director Melissa Chen, was the footage recovered from a camera left overnight at the site. "We set up a time-lapse to capture the entire night," Chen later told a local reporter. "The camera was securely mounted and had fresh batteries. When we reviewed the footage the next day, most of it showed nothing unusual. But at precisely 3:17 a.m., the frame briefly filled with what appeared to be faces, dozens of them pressed against the lens as if looking in from another space. Then the camera died. Technical experts who examined the footage concluded it was likely the result of moisture on the lens combined with moonlight, creating unusual refraction patterns. The documentary was never completed, with Chen citing creative differences with the production company. In private conversations, however, she admitted the experience had left her deeply unsettled. "I've filmed in supposedly haunted locations across the country," she told a colleague. "The Calloway site was different. It didn't feel haunted in the traditional sense. It felt like a place where the usual rules of reality had been slightly adjusted, where something was paying attention that shouldn't have been able to." The scientific investigation of the site continued with a more rigorous approach in 2017, when Dr. James Morrison of Virginia Tech installed seismic monitoring equipment around the perimeter of the circular clearing. His stated purpose was to study geological anomalies, but colleagues acknowledged his fascination with the Calloway legend. After 6 months of data collection, Morrison published an article in the Journal of Geophysical Research documenting subtle but consistent vibrational patterns emanating from beneath the circle. These vibrations occurred at regular intervals, peaking every 7 days, and did not correspond to any known geological activity in the region. The pattern suggests some form of rhythmic movement, approximately 200 feet below the surface, Morrison wrote. While natural explanations such as underground water movement cannot be ruled out, the regularity of the cycle is unusual. More controversial was Morrison's observation that the vibrational pattern changed significantly on October 31, 2017, becoming more intense and complex for exactly 24 hours before returning to its regular pattern. He noted, but did not emphasize, that this date marked the 115th anniversary of Edmund and Margaret Calloway's disappearance. Morrison applied for funding to conduct a more comprehensive study, including deep ground imaging, but his proposal was rejected. University administrators cited budget constraints, though some colleagues suggested his growing obsession with the Calloway connection had damaged his scientific credibility. In private correspondence discovered after his retirement in 2020, Morrison confessed to experiencing unusual phenomena while conducting his research. "I've begun to hear whispers at the edge of perception when working near the circle. At first I attributed this to wind in the trees or distant hikers, but I've now recorded these sounds multiple times, always at dusk, always just below the threshold of clear comprehension. When enhanced and analyzed, they appear to contain patterns consistent with human speech, but in no language I can identify." The Calloway mystery attracted attention from another direction in 2018, when genealogist Maria Hernandez, researching Virginia family histories, made a startling discovery. While examining census records from the mid-19th century, she found evidence that Elias Calloway had spent time with an indigenous tribe before establishing his successful timber business. According to a church record from 1801, Elias had been rescued from savage captivity after supposedly being held by the tribe for nearly a year. The minister who recorded his return noted that Calloway appeared changed in countenance and manner, possessed of knowledge no Christian man should seek. Hernandez's research revealed that the tribe in question was known for its spiritual beliefs concerning thresholds between worlds. Their traditions included rituals performed at specific stone sites during astronomical alignments, rituals believed to communicate with entities that existed at the boundaries of reality. What's particularly interesting, Hernandez wrote in the Journal of American Folklore, is that these rituals occurred in 50-year cycles, corresponding to specific celestial alignments. The tribe believed that during these alignments, the boundary between worlds thinned, allowing communication and potentially agreements with what they called the Watchers Between. This connection might have remained an interesting but inconclusive footnote in the Calloway saga, if not for a discovery made during routine forestry maintenance in 2020. Workers clearing deadfall near the circular clearing unearthed a small metal box containing what appeared to be Elias Calloway's personal journal, preserved in remarkable condition. The journal, authenticated by historical experts based on handwriting and material analysis, contained detailed accounts of Elias's time with the indigenous tribe and his discovery of what he called the entity in the stone circle. His entries describe being taken to a sacred site where tribal elders performed rituals during a specific astronomical alignment. They believed the stone marked a threshold, Elias wrote, a point where our world touches another. During the ceremony, I experienced something I cannot explain through Christian understanding. A presence emerged from within the stone, not visible to the eye, but perceptible to the mind. It communicated without words, offering knowledge and prosperity in exchange for recognition. The most disturbing entry, dated March 17, 1803, exactly 99 years before Frederick Calloway's death, describes Elias's decision to make a formal agreement with this entity. Today I have secured my family's future. The entity requires acknowledgement of its power through sacrifice, a life freely given every 50 years when the stars align as they did tonight. In return, the land will yield prosperity beyond imagining. I have marked the location and begun construction of the chamber beneath the eastern grove. May God forgive what necessity demands. The final pages of the journal detail the ritual Elias performed, the willing sacrifice of his wife, and the immediate change in his fortunes that followed. He describes the entity as neither malevolent nor benevolent, but utterly alien in its understanding of human life, viewing our existence as brief flickers easily exchanged for something it values more. Recognition across the threshold. The journal was transferred to the Virginia Historical Society, where it underwent extensive analysis. While some experts questioned its authenticity, suggesting it might be an elaborate hoax, materials testing confirmed the paper, ink, and binding were consistent with early 19th century manufacturing processes. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a historian specializing in early American folk beliefs, found the journal's contents aligned with documented indigenous traditions from the region. What makes the Calloway Journal particularly credible, she wrote, is that it describes spiritual concepts that weren't widely documented until the late 20th century. Elias Calloway could not have known these details unless he had indeed had direct contact with the tribe as claimed. The discovery reignited interest in the Calloway mystery. In 2021, a team from the university's Department of Anthropology secured rare permission to conduct limited excavation at the circular clearing using minimally invasive techniques to examine what lay beneath. Their findings, published in the American Journal of Archaeology, confirmed the presence of a carefully constructed chamber approximately 6 feet below the surface. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a circular room roughly 15 feet in diameter, with a raised platform at its center. The team was able to extract a small soil sample through a narrow bore hole, which contained traces of human blood dating to various periods, the most recent from approximately 1902. Most significant was their discovery of a stone tablet embedded in the chamber wall, visible through a fiber optic camera. The tablet bore inscriptions combining European and indigenous symbols, arranged in a pattern that archaeologist Dr. Samuel Williams described as a form of contract or agreement, with symbols representing payment, obligation, and cycles of time. Williams noted particular symbols indicating a 50-year renewal period and what appeared to be representations of human figures being exchanged for prosperity, depicted as abundant trees and crops. At the center of the tablet was a symbol identical to the mark found on the document Edmund Calloway had left with Attorney Garland in 1902. What we're looking at, Williams concluded, appears to be a physical representation of the agreement referenced in the Calloway family documents. Whether this represents an actual supernatural contract or merely the physical manifestation of a family's psychological burden is beyond archaeological determination. But its existence confirms that the Calloways genuinely believed in this pact and took concrete steps to fulfill what they saw as their obligation. The research team's permits did not allow for removal of the tablet or further excavation of the chamber. After documentation, the site was carefully restored and designated a protected archaeological area, with no further research permitted. In the years since, the Calloway mystery has remained an object of fascination for both scholars and the general public. Local tourism has increased, with guided tours of the Blacksburg area, often including a stop near, though not within, the circular clearing. Gift shops in town sell Calloway-themed merchandise, from T-shirts bearing the mysterious boundary symbol to coffee mugs depicting the long-gone house with its distinctive hexagonal tower. Yet those who approach the site with more than casual interest often report unusual experiences: cameras malfunction, compass needles spin. Visitors describe sudden emotional shifts, overwhelming dread giving way to strange euphoria. Park rangers have established a policy of not allowing visitors within the circular clearing itself, citing environmental concerns, though some suggest the real reason is the number of people who became disoriented or experienced panic attacks within its boundary. In 2022, professor of comparative folklore, Dr. Richard Bennett published Bargains at the Boundary: Threshold Entities in World Mythology, which placed the Calloway case within a broader context of similar legends from cultures around the globe. What makes the Calloway story particularly compelling, Bennett wrote, is the extensive documentation surrounding it. Most threshold entity legends exist purely as oral tradition, with little physical evidence. The Calloway case offers journals, photographs, archaeological findings, and a clear pattern of prosperity followed by disappearance. While none of this proves the existence of a supernatural entity, it demonstrates how thoroughly a family can become entrapped in its own mythology, whether self-created or inherited from indigenous beliefs. Bennett's research identified similar patterns in folktales from Scandinavia, West Africa, Japan, and Peru, all featuring entities that exist at boundaries, crossroads, stone circles, cave entrances, and offer prosperity in exchange for periodic sacrifice. These stories may represent cultural metaphors for the moral compromises involved in achieving prosperity, Bennett concluded, or they may point to something older than human civilization, an attempt to explain encounters with the truly other, the consciousness that exists adjacent to our reality but operates by incomprehensible rules. In 2023, a significant development occurred when an elderly woman named Eleanor Jenkins contacted the Montgomery Historical Society claiming to possess a letter written by Margaret Calloway. In each tradition, the entity is described not as evil, but as operating according to alien logic, viewing the exchange as perfectly equitable despite the human cost. Jenkins explained that her grandmother had been a servant in the Richmond house where Edmund and Margaret lived before returning to Blacksburg. The letter had been passed down through her family with instructions to keep it private until 120 years had passed since the Calloways' disappearance. The letter, authenticated by handwriting experts and dated September 5, 1902, was addressed to Margaret's sister Elizabeth, but apparently never sent. "Dearest Elizabeth, I write this in great distress, though I must maintain the appearance of calm for Edmund's sake. What I have discovered in this house defies rational explanation, yet the evidence is too substantial to dismiss as mere superstition. Edmund has shared with me the terrible burden of his family legacy. For generations, the Calloways have maintained their prosperity through what can only be described as a bargain with something ancient and utterly alien. Every 50 years, the head of the family must provide a sacrifice to the entity that dwells beneath the eastern grove, a human life willingly surrendered. I initially believed this to be a manifestation of Edmund's deteriorating mental state, perhaps inherited from his father. But I have now seen the chamber beneath the grove, the stone tablet with its undecipherable markings, and most convincingly, the record of the family's prosperity, how it has risen and fallen in precise 50-year cycles corresponding exactly with the disappearances. Edmund intends to complete the cycle by offering me as the sacrifice. He believes he is being merciful, sparing me from knowledge of what is to come. But I have been conducting my own research in the county archives and have discovered something he does not know. The original agreement, as transcribed in Elias Calloway's hidden journal, contains a provision for termination. The entity's interest is not in human life itself, but in recognition, acknowledgement of its existence across the threshold. If both the designated sacrifice and the Calloway heir enter the circle together at the appointed time, renouncing all prosperity gained through the agreement, the contract becomes void. I have not yet told Edmund of my discovery. He is too far gone in his conviction that there is no escape from his family's legacy. I must convince him that another path exists before October 31st, when the stars will align as they did in 1803 and 1853. If you do not hear from me after that date, know that I have either succeeded in breaking the cycle or failed and become part of it. In either case, I beg you not to investigate too deeply. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess. With eternal love, Margaret. The letter provided new insight into the Calloway's final days and suggested an explanation for their joint disappearance that aligned with Margaret's previously discovered final message about another way. In light of this new evidence, researcher Dr. Laura Mitchell proposed a theory that has gained significant acceptance among those studying the case. The evidence suggests that Edmund and Margaret did indeed enter the circle together on October 31st, 1902, not with the intention of completing the sacrifice but of terminating the agreement entirely. Their complete disappearance, leaving behind all possessions and making no withdrawals from their accounts, aligns with Margaret's description of renouncing all prosperity gained through the agreement. Mitchell points to the collapse of the Calloway timber business within months of their disappearance as further evidence. If we accept the premise of the agreement for analytical purposes, the sudden failure of a previously thriving enterprise suggests the prosperity component was, indeed, withdrawn, consistent with a termination rather than a renewal of the cycle. As for what actually happened to Edmund and Margaret Calloway, Mitchell offers a measured conclusion. The most likely explanation remains that they either took their own lives in some way that prevented discovery of their bodies, or that they established new identities elsewhere, thoroughly severing all connections to their past. The more fantastical possibility that they were somehow taken by whatever entity they believed dwelled beneath the grove remains outside the realm of historical verification, though it continues to fascinate those drawn to the case. Today, the land where the Calloway house once stood appears unremarkable to passing hikers. The foundation stones have been covered by decades of fallen leaves, the surrounding forest thick and healthy. Yet local guides still advise against camping near the eastern grove, not because of any superstition, they insist, but because the ground there never quite feels solid beneath one's feet. The Montgomery County Historical Society maintains a small collection of Calloway family photographs and documents available to researchers by appointment. The metal box containing Margaret's final letter is kept in climate-controlled storage at the Virginia State Archives in Richmond. The stone with unusual markings discovered in the hidden chamber was transferred to the Smithsonian in 1956, but was reportedly lost during cataloging and has never been located. As for the fate of Edmund and Margaret Calloway, the official record still lists them as missing persons. Their case remains the oldest unsolved disappearance in Montgomery County history. Every 50 years, without fail, local newspapers run a retrospective on the case. The most recent, published in 2002, noted that despite decades of speculation, no conclusive evidence has ever emerged to explain what happened that autumn night in 1902. Perhaps the only certainty is found in the final line of Margaret's letter, "The cycle ends with us." Whether through coincidence or design, no member of the Calloway family ever returned to claim their once substantial holdings in the region. The land that brought them prosperity eventually erased nearly all evidence they had ever existed. The twisted bargain that began with Elias Calloway in 1803, whatever its true nature, appears to have finally concluded on that cold November morning in 1902, when William Hughes found an empty house, pristine in its abandonment, mirrors carefully covered, and silence filling the halls. For those who study such cases, the Calloway mystery represents something beyond ordinary human darkness. Not the supernatural, perhaps, but the terrifying capabilities of human minds when faced with moral compromise, isolation, and the weight of inherited guilt. The house is gone, the family line extinguished, but the question remains: when the prosperity of generations depends upon unspeakable choices, what price is ultimately too high? As you travel through the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, particularly near the old-growth forests outside Blacksburg, consider that beneath the beauty of those ancient trees lie stories carved from human nature itself, some buried intentionally, others simply waiting to be uncovered by those willing to look beyond the surface of history. In 2024, as the 50th anniversary of the demolition of the Calloway house approaches, local authorities have reported an increase in trespassers attempting to visit the circular clearing at night. Motion-activated wildlife cameras installed by the Forestry Service have captured unusual light phenomena within the circle, glowing orbs that environmental scientists attribute to bioluminescent fungi or insects, though none have been found in subsequent daylight inspections. Perhaps most unsettling are the reports from overnight hikers on the nearby Appalachian Trail, who claim to hear whispers in the forest after midnight, voices that seem to repeat the same phrase, "The agreement stands." For those who prefer rational explanations, the Calloway case offers a fascinating study in family psychology, the power of suggestion, and the human tendency to create meaning from coincidence. For those drawn to more mysterious possibilities, it represents a rare example of thoroughly documented encounters with the unknown. Whatever the truth may be, the circular clearing in the eastern grove remains, a perfect absence of vegetation in an otherwise thriving forest, marking a boundary not just of land, but perhaps of understanding itself.